You're listening to the DolphinsTalk.com podcast network.
There's a team that's in our hearts. We've got love that won't depart. We are always in the stands, 'cause we're super Dolphin fans. Football is mighty rough. Winning gets awful tough. We're rooting for the Dolphins. Our mighty, mighty Dolphins. We're rooting for the Dolphins. Our mighty, mighty Dolphins.
Hello, Miami Dolphin fans, and welcome to the Same Old Dolphin Show, part of the DolphinsTalk.com podcast network. I'm Josh Katzker. With me today and every day is my brother from the exact same mother, Aaron the Brain. Aaron, say hello to the people.
Hello to the people.
How you doing, Brain? I feel like we haven't done this in a really long time. It's only been a couple of weeks, but I feel like it's been a long time since we've done an episode.
It feels like it. It feels like I'm just coming back from a sabbatical, like a birthday sabbatical that I just took.
You did. You did take a birthday sabbatical. You kind of left us in the lurch. You went spent a little time in the magnificent, booming metropolis of Detroit. And then you went and you hung out. You took some time off of work. You went away. You got away. You chilled. You relaxed. You certainly seem refreshed to me.
Yeah, you got to do it. If you can, you got to do it. I mean, not everybody has the opportunity to take a whole week off of work on a whim. I'm blessed to have been able to, and highly recommend it. I feel recharged, reset, and ready to go as we jump right into the I don't know if you would call it the most exciting part of the off season. I guess for some people it's the most exciting, for some people it's free agency, but I think it's probably the most important part of the off season if we're being honest on team building. If you're going to be a successful franchise, you're going to build your team through the draft. You're not going to build your team through free agency. And so here we go. We're just a few weeks away from the NFL draft. And for the first time in a while, the Dolphins have a bevy of draft picks. It feels like an important one.
It does feel like an important draft for the Miami Dolphins. And we're gonna get into it. This episode of the show is going to be focused on strategy for the first round and what the Dolphins are going to do with that pick as it stands right now at number 13. So that's what we're going to focus on today. And then the next week, we're going to talk about day 2 of the draft. And then the following week, we'll talk about day 3 of the draft. And whether the Dolphins are going to make some big draft picks. What are they going to do? How are they going to do it? Who are they going to target? And we're going to be discussing that over the next few weeks because it's getting to be about that time. And we're going to have you covered, whether it's here on the Same Old Dolphin Show or elsewhere here on the DolphinsTalk.com podcast network. So make sure, if you haven't done so already, that you have smashed the like button on the video here. If you're watching right now, take a second real quick, hit the thumbs up. Thank you for that. We appreciate it. Subscribe to the Dolphins Talk YouTube channel. And if you have not done this already, go to Apple Podcasts. And this is big. If you go to Apple Podcasts and leave a 5-star review and write a positive comment for the DolphinsTalk.com podcast network, not just the Same Old Dolphin Show, although we appreciate that, but on the DolphinsTalk.com podcast feed in Apple Podcasts, if you leave a 5-star rating, write a positive comment, screenshot it, and email it to dolphinstalk1977@gmail.com by this upcoming Monday, that is, I believe, April the 7th, you will be entered into a drawing to win a Miami Dolphins draft hat, just like the one that whoever the Dolphins pick at number 13 is going to be wearing on that stage. So enter the contest, leave us a 5-star rating, leave us a positive review. We appreciate it very much. And of course, make sure you're visiting DolphinsTalk.com each and every day. It's your one-stop shop for all things Miami Dolphins. We'll have you covered all off season. And the other thing is, make sure that you subscribe to Dolphins Talk Extra, because if you want more great Dolphins Talk content, that's where it's at. Patreon.com/Dolphins Talk. You can join for as little as $3 a month. You get extra podcasts. I've been doing a series of shows with David Behrman from Pro Football Network, covering draft prospects that the Dolphins are going to be looking at in different positions in different parts of the draft. You also get access to our Discord server. We're also running contests over there as well, including a March Madness tournament that somebody is going to walk away with I believe a Tua Tagovailoa bobblehead doll, which it's a really unfortunate way to say things when you say Tua Tagovailoa bobblehead, but it is what it is. And the winner of this March Madness competition is getting that. So sign up if you haven't yet. Patreon.com/Dolphins Talk for as little as $3 a month. We appreciate it very much. Brain, before we get into the draft strategy for the first round, we got to talk about what is one of the two kind of mystery pieces of information that the Dolphins are kind of waiting on before the draft. The first one, the one that we don't know about yet is the status of Teron Armstead, whether he's actually going to retire or whether he's going to decide to play another year. And then if he decides to play another year, whether or not he's going to be a member of the Miami Dolphins in 2025. That's a chip that we still don't know. That ball is still in the air. We're going to wait to find out about that. But the other one was, what was Calais Campbell going to do? The 39-year-old defensive tackle that the Dolphins brought in as part of a multi-part plan to fill the hole left by the departing Christian Wilkins. And the Dolphins brought in Calais Campbell in 2024, got, I think, better play from Calais Campbell than anybody could have imagined. I mean, it was the absolute best case scenario for the Dolphins. He played a lot and he played really, really well while staying healthy all season, to the point that it was really something that the Dolphins were chasing, was the idea of bringing Calais Campbell back at that defensive tackle position to play the majority of the snaps next to Zach Sealer in this defense. Well, we found out this week that Calais Campbell has decided he does want to continue to play. He just does not want to do that in Miami. He's going to, sounds like, finish his career in Arizona, which, as it is the same place that his career started, that's where he's off to. His contract that he's signing with them is, I think, worth $5 million, perhaps all the way up to $7 million, which is something the Dolphins could have afforded after they moved some money around with the Zach Wilson deal. They had the space to sign Calais Campbell up for another year if they wanted to, but evidently they couldn't match what Arizona offered, or it might have just been Arizona calling Calais Campbell home. Regardless, Calais Campbell is gone, and that leaves with the Dolphins with yet another hole at defensive tackle. And so, Brain, that leads me to ask you, how do you feel about this Calais Campbell departure?
I mean, to me, it's just a continuance of what we've seen this offseason, which is the Dolphins are not aggressively pursuing anybody. They've got their price. They're sticking to it. They're being very frugal, if you will. And they just seem like a team that's decided that they're not only are they not going to go all in this year, but they are going to be decidedly cautious with their spending, seemingly at the detriment of what they can accomplish in 2025, and instead taking a more longer view approach. It's been very consistent since the start of free agency with the guys that they've targeted, with the signings that they've made, with the reported guys that they've been in on and then ultimately didn't end up getting. To me, this sounds like a situation. I mean, I don't know for sure how seriously in talks they were with Calais Campbell, but it seems to me, I mean, like Calais Campbell basically got signed for like 3 times what he played for last year. And it's a contract that could be up worth up to like $7.5 million. And the Dolphins decided, like, no, we're not really going all in on this season. So why are we going to spend a bunch of money on a, soon to be 40-year-old defensive tackle? And while I can understand that, it's definitely got to be frustrating to fans that feel like, what are we waiting for? We should be trying to win now, because the team clearly isn't.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I am right now. And it's why I was thinking before the show, should we do a pulse check segment today? We haven't done that in a long time, I think, since the end of the regular season. And I was thinking that if we were to do a pulse check, and I don't know if we're doing a full proper pulse check segment here today, but if I was going to do a pulse check segment, the one word that I would use to describe how I feel about the Dolphins right now is skeptical. I feel skeptical that this team is actively trying to do anything other than kind of play out some contracts that they have on the books. They're not doing a full teardown. It's not a full aggressive tank, but it's almost like they're doing a half tank in that they're not really trying to aggressively strengthen this team in any real way. I have not seen a lot of action taken from this team that leads me to believe that they are really working to go all in to be contenders in 2025. What I have seen thus far from this team is evidence to me that this is a team that is kind of looking beyond 25 and thinking about how can we kind of leverage what we have right now in order to ensure that we can be competitive going forward. And in some ways, I think it's smart. It's a smart thing to not touch some of those bigger contracts, the Tyreek Hill contract, the Tua Tagovailoa contract. It makes sense to leave those alone. Don't do anything with the money there that might jeopardize your ability to move off of those players some point down the road and pivot to what the next stage of this build is going to be. And that's kind of what I feel like. I feel like we are in a place where we are very close to seeing the Miami Dolphins begin to pivot away from the version of the team that we have now watched for the last 3 years. To me, this team peaked in 2023, and then the injuries became insurmountable and the team crumbled down the stretch. And that they have consistently been trying to reach the level that they were at, the high that Dolphins fans were feeling when they beat the Dallas Cowboys on Christmas Eve in 2023. That was kind of the height of this current builds of the Dolphins. And that since then we experienced 2024, which was a big step backwards. And there's nothing to me that indicates that 2025 is going to be a significant step forward again, which leads me to be skeptical that there's going to be a whole lot to look forward to in terms of the 2025 season.
Yeah, and I think you're fair to feel that way. My word would be underwhelmed, because for me, like, and I've talked about this so many times, but it's just like, it goes back to how they treated last offseason. Whereas if you weren't going to go all in last offseason, the whole idea of that was that you were kind of taking the soft reset, reconfiguring some things, giving yourself flexibility to kind of extend this quote unquote winning window that they were supposed to be in. It wasn't supposed to be a 1-year winning window in 2023, or the back half of 2022 when they traded for Bradley Chubb, and then into 2023. And then all of a sudden it's like a rebuild. It was like, okay, you could either go all in right now and try to win in 2024, and maybe you've got a chance in 2024 and 25, and then you're going to have to do a major rebuild right after that. Or we could take a more cautious approach as 2024 and really have a winning window of like 25, 26, 27, and potentially beyond based on how you do that. And I understand that last year was a disappointment, but I think contextually, the ways that this team failed in 2024 were not surprising based on the moves that they made in the offseason prior to that. And so to me, yeah, like there were other things like Tyreek Hill, falling off and, another Tua Tagovailoa concussion. And not that those things were super surprising. Like the fact is that Tua is still your quarterback. Tyreek Hill is still on the roster. Whether he will be long-term or not is, remains to be seen. But the fact is that the places where this team failed last year were in the places where they did not ultimately invest in the offseason prior. So you would feel like, well, if the plan was we're going to invest in those the following year, then we have all this flexibility and we have the ability to restructure contracts and we have the ability to add more pieces and we have all this draft capital that we should absolutely be going for it right now. Not necessarily all in, but being aggressive towards winning this year, next year, and the following year. But what they're doing this offseason is with the moves that they're making, they're basically telling you we're going to go with essentially the same team that we had last year with marginal upgrades in free agency. I mean, more downgrades than upgrades, really. And then whoever we ultimately bring in the draft, and we're going to try to build this thing more organically based on the foundation that we have. And while I would say, yeah, that's not necessarily the worst idea in the world, and I definitely see the logic in it. The fact is that the guys that are making the decisions haven't shown you the ability to do that. And if they're not trying to win this year, then why are they still the guys that are making the decisions? Because Chris Greer, basically, you said it right. We peaked in 2023. We peaked in 2023 and did not win a playoff game. We got in as a wild card, as a 6 seed, and we did not win a playoff game. It's the most same old Dolphins thing that you could have done for your peak to be a 6 seed and a first round exit on the road in the playoffs. And that's good enough to get you this long runway where you could basically throw away 2 seasons and say, oh, we're building for the long run. We did a good job. We tried and we did that whole tear it down from the studs and we did all of that to get to the playoffs and lose in the first round? I mean, get the hell out of here. Like, if you're not trying to win now with the plan that was in place, then you need to change the person that was making the plan to begin with. Otherwise, like, why should we believe that there's going to be anything different moving forward?
Correct. And this is the thing that kills me about this team. And it's the way that this team has kind of, what it has done to the fan base is that you will inevitably have somebody who is hearing us make these statements. And I don't know if it's anybody who's listening right now. And if this is you, let us know in the comments. But there will inevitably be somebody who hears this and thinks, yeah, but you know what? The Dolphins, they might not be building a Super Bowl team right now, a team that can win the Super Bowl in 2025, but they can be building a team that can get into the playoffs and win a playoff game in 2025, as if that's the goal. Which that's not the goal. And frankly, I don't know that the Dolphins are any closer to winning the division now than they were. Like I said, 2023 was the moment. They had it right there in their hands. If they don't choke away a Monday Night Football game to the Tennessee Titans, they win that division. If they don't fail to win a home game the last week of the season against the Buffalo Bills, they win the division. They host the Steelers in the first round of the playoffs. And then that's the step forward. But they haven't done it. They haven't done those things. And so they are still a team that is kind of lost in the wilderness. And the other thing is that the reason that we're talking about this is to kind of set you up for where we're going in the draft. Because the fact of the matter is, the Dolphins, you always want to be the team that gets to the draft and has the opportunity, especially when you have as much capital as the Dolphins have in the draft, that you want to be able to go into that draft and say, we are going to draft the best player available when it is our turn to draft. And what you have right now is a situation where the Dolphins not only can they not simply take the best player available at 13, they also cannot simply take the best player available at 48. And they probably can't simply just take the best player available at 98. The Dolphins are approaching this draft with so many holes in their roster that need to be filled by immediate contributors that it's hard to see how they're going to get what they need out of this draft and walk away satisfied. Okay? And don't get me wrong. There will absolutely, and clip this, there will absolutely be people who walk away from the draft, regardless of who the Dolphins pick. There will be people who will be telling you that the Dolphins hit this draft out of the park and that they are absolutely going to be a team to be reckoned with because they drafted this player, this player, this player, and this player. I want to remind you that a year ago, just over a year ago, you had people walking out of after the draft going, the Dolphins are going to be a force to be reckoned with because Malik Washington is going to be an awesome number 3 receiver. Taj Washington is going to be a baller. Mo Kamara is going to be nasty. Patrick Paul is going to be a great offensive lineman. And a year later, Taj Washington hasn't played a snap for the Dolphins. Malik Washington has been okay. Malik Washington has been okay for what he was in draft capital. And you would say Patrick Paul at this point remains to be an unknown. We saw some playing time for him this season, and I think most people will say that, he was probably better than most people expected because he was drafted to be a project. He was not drafted to be an immediate starter for this team. And then I think it's safe to say that what the Dolphins got from Chop Robinson was exactly what they would have wanted out of that pick. I think that's fair. But again, with all those other picks, it's like those guys were not big time contributors right off the bat. Malik Washington, you got some juice from. Okay, great. But it wasn't anything. It wasn't a difference making amount of juice. And that's what the Dolphins need. They need to come into this draft with these 10 picks and end up with 3 or 4 guys who are not just immediate contributors, but immediate needle movers for this team. And I have my doubts as to whether or not that is something that is actually going to happen.
I don't know that there were, to be fair, I don't know that there were a lot of people that were screaming from the hilltops that Taj Washington and Malik
Go
Washington.
back and check my Twitter mentions.
I mean,
part of the reason I'm not on Twitter anymore is that I got tired of people telling me how great Taj Washington was going to be.
Yeah. I mean, look, I thought last year's draft was like, we came on here and I think most people were in agreement that like last year's draft, the way that they approached it was they took guys that were going to be somewhat of a project. Even Chop Robinson was seen as a guy that's like, this is a guy that will ultimately contribute in year 1, but probably will make a much bigger leap in year 2. And Patrick Paul, much the same way. This was a guy that was basically drafted with all the tackles that they already had. He had.
Uh-oh, I lost you.
Yeah, my mic got unplugged. And like Patrick Paul was supposed to be a guy that wasn't even supposed to play because we addressed all these tackles, and lo and behold, he still ended up out there for 300 snaps or whatever. And I think he played reasonably well. I think he played pretty well when he was playing left tackle. But they traded a future 3rd round pick to take Jalen Wright in the 4th round. And barely used him, although he showed a little bit of promise. And then you talk about like Malik Washington and Mo Kamara, who I think most people would say were like value picks and people were excited. But like, I mean, they were 5th and 6th round picks. Like it wasn't like, I don't remember a bunch of people just being like, oh yeah, these guys are going to come in and contribute right away. And the Dolphins knocked it out of the park. I don't know about that. But that said, I think your point is still fair. There's always going to be people that drink the Kool-Aid after every offseason and think that, they knocked it out of the park. And then you look back a year later and it could be very different. And that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah. So I just, again, we say all of this because I think we're approaching this draft with, I wouldn't say high expectations for what the Dolphins are going to do in it. I think that the Dolphins have such a mountain to climb to be a real legitimate contender this season that it's hard to see. Even if they do hit a home run in this draft, it feels like it's a lot to ask for to have this draft transform this team. Then are there still moves that they can make in this offseason that can change things around? Yeah, I'd say there's certainly some things that they can do this offseason that can elevate things a bit. But like I said, it's going to be a long way to go to make me feel super optimistic about the season to come. But before we get into the draft talk, and we're going to do it because there is a lot to talk about in this draft, a reminder to you to make sure that you go to caneswear.com, caneswear.com. That's the best place to go on the internet for all of your South Florida sports fan needs. So if you are looking for the latest hat or shirt for the Miami Heat, sorry about that. The Florida Panthers.
Hey, the Miami Heat are on fire, right?
Well, right now, it's they're looking forward to losing in the play-in game. But regardless, you got, if whatever you're looking for, they got you covered over there at caneswear.com. Maybe you're a Miami Marlins fan. Maybe you need to get a new Marlins cap. Maybe you want to be one of the last people to have a Sandy Alcantara jersey before the Marlins trade him away. Whatever the deal is, they got you covered over there at caneswear.com, and we thank them for their sponsorship. So thank you, caneswear.com. Thank you. Head on over there. All right, Brain, draft. Dolphins have 10 picks in this draft. And the very first one is at number 13. Now, for long-time listeners of our program, you know how we feel about draft capital, right? Draft capital, you often hear a lot of people talking about, oh, it's so great. The Dolphins are loaded up in this draft. Dolphins got a lot of draft capital. And here's the thing. Draft capital is only as good as how you use it. And the Dolphins with 10 picks in this draft, I think, are going to get creative. I think they will certainly, I would be very surprised if the Dolphins ended this draft having made 10 picks, the 10 picks that they have available right now without moving at all. I think there's going to be some movement in the cards. Where that movement is remains to be seen. But we're focusing on the first round today. And the Dolphins pick at number 13. And going back to draft capital, what you can do with it is you can use it to make good picks right where you're at. You can use it to move up in the draft. You can use it to acquire more draft capital, or you can use that draft capital to acquire players from outside the team. My gut tells me that I don't expect the Dolphins to move picks around in order to bring an external player from another NFL team in, but I do think there is the possibility that the Dolphins could move a little bit in the draft. And I don't think it's beyond a possibility that the Dolphins could end up using some of that trade capital to move around or some of the draft capital rather, to move around within that first round. Perhaps they could move up. I also certainly don't think it's out of the question that this team could decide to trade back in the draft. But Brain, what I first want to do, before we talk about what you think the Dolphins should do in terms of moving, stay put, whatever, I want to know for you, what is in your mind the position that the Dolphins must address at 13?
I can't answer that. And I think that's kind of where I'm at with this team, is like you're approaching your entire offseason as a team that look, you're trying to be competitive in 2025, but you're not really trying to like win. You're clearly not going all in. You clearly are taking the long view. So why am I going to go into this draft and say, I need to get a player to fill this position for 2025? It doesn't make any sense. I mean, yes, we happen to have a lot of holes. So we have a lot of positions that could be filled. And so there's a high likelihood that you get to pick number 13. And there are multiple players on the draft board that would be good value, appropriate value. You could make the case that they're the best player on your board and they're at a position of need. And that's a beautiful thing. But I don't know that there's one position that sticks out. Like, you know, I think if I had to, like, gun to my head and you said you have to answer, I would say, well, I would like to do the one thing that the Dolphins haven't been doing very much recently, and that's invest in the offensive line. And so I would say take an offensive lineman. But I think the worst thing that you can do is go in with a singular mindset of we absolutely need to come out of this with a starting offensive lineman. And so you end up reaching on a guy that's not the best player there because it might be a cornerback. It might be an edge rusher. It might be a linebacker. It might be a defensive tackle. It might be a safety. And you could look at all of those positions and you can make the case that they are either a position of need going into 2025, or there's a strong likelihood that they will be a position of need going into 2026. And if that's the case, like, who am I to say that that's not a good, use of that draft capital? I don't think that you can come into this and say, we absolutely need to get this position, this position, this position. I think that if you go in with that mindset, that's a great way to have a terrible draft.
I mean, that's fair. That's certainly fair. And I think the thing is, the Dolphins have so many positions of need that I think they will probably have a list of those three positions. And for me, I think the areas that we're realistically looking at is they're looking at cornerback. They're looking at, well, I don't want to say cornerback necessarily. I think they're looking at the defensive. I think they're looking at the secondary.
I think they need a corner.
Yeah, they need a corner. They need a safety. They need a defensive tackle. And I think they also need help on the offensive line, whether that be tackle or guard. And just knowing this franchise's track record, I don't see them investing in a guard in the first round of the draft. Although, wouldn't that be funny?
I will say this. Like, when you take a look at the team's biggest needs and you're at offensive line, specifically guard, you could use a third tackle, but like if you drafted Patrick Paul in the second round last year, you signed Austin Jackson. If you're going in with the idea that those are your starting tackles, not that they couldn't use another tackle, but you can't really go in and say that tackle is like their biggest need. It's specifically guard. And then you look at safety and you look at defensive tackle and then you look at cornerback. One of those positions is significantly more important than the other. One of those positions is significantly harder to fill than the other. And when you look at the cornerback position in specifically, and you look at what you have at that position, you have one really good player who is aging in Jalen Ramsey. And then you have a bunch of youth. You have Kader Kohu, and then you have a bunch of unknown, really. And so,
although I will say that the picture is becoming a lot clearer on Cam Smith.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, the picture's as clear on Cam Smith as it is about Ethan Bonner and Isaiah Johnson and, any of the other guys that are like, prospects, essentially. They're unproven, they're youth. You cannot count on them. And so like it, whether or not it's a pick for 2025 or 2026, at some point you're going to need a corner. And if Jalen Ramsey hits the wall, I think that he'll age gracefully. But if he hits a wall and cannot play corner at a high level within a year or two, then you're absolutely bereft of talent at that position. So I think if there is a position, not necessarily that you have to get it at 13, but if there's a position that you probably have to get in the first 2 days of the draft, it is cornerback.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. And so let's look at this. Let's look at this pick, right? So I think you're kind of weighing prospects because there are a number of guys that I think are likely to be available for the Dolphins at 13 when you look at them, I think across different positions. And you take a look at like just looking at different mock drafts that have come across from different places, you kind of get a sense of who is going to be available. I'm seeing the result of 5 different mock drafts that took place on Pro Football Network's mock draft simulator. And I see that the number 1 most popular player for the Dolphins was Kelvin Banks Jr., offensive tackle. The next most popular was Malachi Starks, the safety out of Georgia. And finally, Tyler Booker, the guard out of Alabama. Those were the 3 most popular players taken in Dolphins mock drafts at 13. But we've also had a fair number of mocks where somebody has taken Will Johnson, the cornerback from Michigan. And I think that is somebody that needs to be considered as well there. You also have to consider Nick Eamon-Warry, the safety out of South Carolina. He's another possibility. There are a couple of, I think consensus suggests that Will Campbell won't be around by the time the Dolphins pick at 13, but he's a guy that the Dolphins might consider if he's the number 1 guy on their list. That's somebody that the Dolphins could potentially try to package some trade capital with to move up to go and get, if that's, the player that they have their eye on. I need your thoughts on this, Brain, because you mentioned Patrick Paul earlier, and there's been a little bit of discourse about this. There is seems to be a growing consensus that there's concern that Patrick Paul might not be the player that the Dolphins want him to be. He might not be able to become that player. He might not be ready to be the starting left tackle for the Miami Dolphins in 2025 in the event that Teron Armstead does in fact retire, or the Dolphins do decide that they're ready to move on from him. And so the question is, if you're the Dolphins, are you ready to use your highest draft pick on another offensive tackle, knowing that you just drafted Patrick Paul last year?
I wouldn't let it dissuade me from taking the best player on my board. But that said, I'm not going to I'm not feeling great about going and drafting a guy so Kelvin Banks is that's the most popular draft pick that's being mocked to the Dolphins right now. And there seems to be a lot of discourse around, when you read his scouting report, everybody loves the traits, the athleticism, the height, weight, speed stuff. But technically, he has some concerns with hand placement and just the technicalities of the position, which, by the way, this is exactly the book on Patrick Paul last season. Was this guy is if you put him in a lab, if you built an offensive lineman, a tackle in the lab, you would have been Patrick Paul, but he hasn't put it all together yet. And so I don't know that I'm chomping at the bit to draft another guy 1 year later who's essentially in the same vein. Granted, he's played at a bigger school. He's got more, he's played at a high level against better competition. And, he seems to be perhaps a more polished project than Patrick Paul was. But I've also heard people compare him to Austin Jackson in that regard. And Austin Jackson was a guy who very much in the same vein, was a guy who had all the athletic traits, like a lot of things that you could be very excited about, but there was like, how is he going to fare when he goes up against really savvy NFL defenders that can take advantage of his weaknesses, and they're going to get him off balance? It doesn't seem like this is a can't miss prospect. And he doesn't seem like a guy that is really well suited to be moved inside to guard. So I don't know that I'm necessarily high on drafting a tackle that does not have positional flexibility when I just drafted Patrick Paul in the second round last year. It'd be a different story if it was like a different GM that was in charge, but it's like, what does that say about Chris Greer that he drafted Patrick Paul in the second round? You just re-signed Austin Jackson, and then you're going to go out and you're going to draft another tackle who could exclusively only play tackle. That doesn't seem like a great use of resources. Now, if Will Campbell should happen to drop, I think Will Campbell might actually project better as a guard than he does as a tackle, but can also play tackle. And that is a player that intrigues me. If Will Campbell is there, then I have no problem with that. It's one of the reasons why when we did our free agent show, I talked about Mekhi Becton being the first guy that I would pound the table for, because I would say, I want a guy that could play tackle if he needed to, but we know can play guard at a high level. And that's kind of where I would be on the offensive line. I don't think I'd be taking a tackle specific player at 13. Now, if I got to 13 and I didn't like what I saw on the board, and the corners that I wanted, Barron and Johnson, were gone, and I wasn't necessarily sold on any of the edge rushers. Maybe I like Tyler Booker, but I don't feel like it's appropriate value to draft him at 13. And maybe I feel like if I could move down a few spots, and then maybe still get like a Tyler Booker or Kelvin Banks, and you're able to pick up like an extra day 2 pick, well, then I'm more on board with that. But I don't know. There's a lot of different ways that the Dolphins can go here, and I think pigeonholing themselves into having to go offensive line is a good way of, missing out on players that could be better players.
Yeah. I tend to agree with you there. The thing is, there's also this thing that it takes offensive linemen more time to develop as NFL players. Cornerbacks, skill position players, even linebackers, defensive linemen. These guys can become impact players a lot faster than offensive linemen do. It just takes them longer to adapt to the speed and size of their NFL opponents. And it's for that reason that I think going secondary, going with, with a Will Johnson or a Malachi Starks, like that to me feels like the safer bet for the Dolphins long term. And it also, at this point, again, it's a reminder that we still don't know what the deal is with Teron Armstead. It's still very possible that we could get to the draft, or get before the draft comes around, that Teron Armstead gives the Dolphins his answer and they decide that they're going to go back with him. And at that point, suddenly all these tackle candidates, I think they're still interesting. But at that point, if you feel like the Dolphins will be less inclined to use that premium draft capital on an offensive lineman. So to me, it feels like the safe move, the smart move, it's also potentially even a more forward-thinking move, is going with that defensive back, going with that cornerback or that safety in the first round. That's, to me, what I like best for the Dolphins in this draft. And so for me, I'm feeling, hey, Dolphins, let's go defense. And we can, not to say that we need to ignore the offensive line, but we can catch up with it a bit later.
All right. Can we play? Let's do a little exercise here.
I love a little exercise.
Let's get a little exercise on the show. both guys on the board for you. You clearly you're leaning defensive back, so we're going to focus on the secondary here. Both guys on the board right now, Will Johnson or Jahdae Barron at corner.
I mean, I think I'm probably going Will Johnson.
Will Johnson, more prototypical boundary corner, can potentially shut down half of the field. Jahdae Barron, more of a guy that can be moved around as a chess piece.
He's more like a Jalen Ramsey type player.
Yeah. I tend to agree that Will Johnson, but I would take either of these guys. But I just wanted to kind of get your feel. Like, do you view these guys as like 1A, 1B? You're happy with either of them? Is there one guy that you clearly favor?
I mean, I like Johnson. I think Johnson is the the fast, athletic player who can break up passes at the catch point. He's somebody who's got good hands on him. He's I think in many ways is like would be the perfect counterpart opposite Jalen Ramsey in this defense right now. And he's another guy that could, become like your next Xavier Howard for this franchise. You know, he's got that ability to sort of fill that role and be that kind of lockdown guy that you can use to, I mean, now as the NFL is shifting, having him on as that true boundary corner is not always going to be the best, the best place for him to shut down the best player on the other team, because we're seeing more and more those elite wide receivers are able to have that kind of great production even out of the slot. But still, I think Will Johnson is the guy that I'm leaning towards here, Brain.
I agree. I think this team needs to get bigger, stronger, more physical. And I think setting the tone on the outside and putting him opposite of Jalen Ramsey gives you two of those guys. And I think it allows you to play a lot more. You could put those two guys on an island playing press coverage. It allows you to be much more aggressive. It can really free up a lot of things for Weaver to get, more exotic with blitz packages. I think to me, it opens up a lot of things. I'd be happy with Jahdae Barron as well, but Will Johnson would be my pick. Okay. So let's say you get to 13. Will Johnson's on the board. Malachi Starks is on the board.
Okay.
Who do you like?
Well, I think this is a question of who do I like versus who does the organization like?
No. Who do you like?
I'm still I don't know. Frankly, I think I'm still going Johnson here.
I agree. I think number one, I mean, like we give Chris Greer a hard time for the whole like premium position thing, but there's some logic to it. Corner is a more important position, and it's a more expensive position to fill than safety. And so I think if you've got, players that are graded similarly at those positions, then, I would take the corner all day. And then the other safety, what's his name? Amenyora from South Carolina. Emenwari. Freakish athlete, like combine darling. Would you take him over Starks, or you take Starks because of just the production?
I think the thing about Emenwari, with him being an incredible athlete, he's a raw talent, who I think you can potentially mold to being flexible and doing a lot of different things for you. But that to me translates as a little bit of a project. And with the Dolphins at 13, they don't have the luxury of being able to draft a guy with an eye towards him being a little bit of a project. And so for me, it's Will Johnson is the guy, Will Johnson is the guy that could immediately be an impact player on this team day one. That's what they need. I do think Malachi Starks has a similar ability to be an impact player day one for the Dolphins there. But I'm only considering Malachi Starks if Johnson is gone at that point. I think that's when I'm starting to look in that direction. And I still tend to think that as much as I like Malachi Starks, I think even Jahdae Barron would be a better pick at 13 than going safety.
There we go. Yeah. So that was going to be my next question. And now let's make it a little bit more difficult. Because, you've mentioned that like defensive back, secondary, that's where you want to go. Let's say that Will Johnson and Jahdae Barron are both gone.
Okay.
But you get to 13 and Malachi Starks is there. He's your preferred safety one. And then you're deciding between him and Kelvin Banks, who we talked about. Let's say an edge rusher that may very well be there, James Pierce out of Tennessee. How about potentially Shamar Stewart? Potentially Jihad Campbell.
If I'm honest, I'm taking Starks over all these guys.
You're taking Starks over all these guys.
Yes.
I'm not sold that I'm taking Starks over. I don't think I'd take him over Jihad Campbell. I probably would take him over Kelvin Banks. If one of those other edge rushers that are projected to go a little earlier, like a Michael Williams, should happen to fall, I'd be interested in there. I know that like you drafted Chop Robinson last year, you brought back Bradley Chubb, and you still have Jalen Phillips. But number one, Jalen Phillips is on an expiring contract and is coming off back-to-back season-ending injuries. So there's very it's very shaky to project anything as far as a future with Jalen Phillips. And Bradley Chubb, after the way they've restructured his contract, he very well might be playing his last year in Miami as well. So I think if one of those premier edge rushers should happen to be there at 13, I think that I'm leaning that way more than going safety. And then I'm going to throw one more name out there because you mentioned him earlier, and I think he's one of the more interesting names for the Dolphins specifically, and that's Tyler Booker. If you get to 13 and Barron and Johnson are off the board and Will Campbell is off the board and, the premier edge rushers are off the board, and you're looking at Kelvin Banks and you're looking at Malachi Starks and you're looking at Tyler Booker, who is going to be a guard-specific player and is more of a mauler. What are your thoughts there? Like, which way? Are you still going Malachi Starks because you need a safety?
Of those guys, if I'm the Miami Dolphins and that's the guy, and Booker is the guy that I have my eyes on in that situation, Booker is the guy that I've decided that I want, I'm trading back. I'm looking for an opportunity to trade back because I think drafting Booker at 13 it's a little bit of a reach to me. It just feels like if I'm drafting Booker at 13, I'm drafting because of need. I'm not drafting the best player available. And that's why I feel like, there's an argument to be said for going and getting your guys. And if the Dolphins have him rated that highly and he's for them, the 13th best player or better in the draft, then fine. I have my doubts that is actually the case, but if Booker's the guy that I have my eye on, I'm actively trying to trade back. I think I don't think I'm sitting pretty at 13 and drafting Tyler Booker.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, obviously you got to get to that point where you're at that, and you got to take a look at the board and you got to say, how many guys are there that we would take at 13? And you get there and it's like Malachi Starks, Tyler Booker, or maybe you feel that way about Kelvin Banks. Maybe you feel that way about Shamar Stewart. Maybe there's like one other guy there, maybe Iman Wari. And then you got to figure out, well, can I move back that number of spots? What can I get back? Because I'm not risking not getting any of those guys if like we're moving from a spot where we are guaranteed to get one of the guys that we love to a spot where, potentially we might not get any of them and we have to pivot. I'm not trading out of that. I'm not. And if I'm trading back to get my third or fourth choice, I need to get something back that's at least a day 2 pick, at least a third round pick, I think, where the Dolphins don't have a third round pick until you get late into the third round into the comp picks. It'd be nice for the Dolphins to recoup that. And that would be something. And if they don't, and they're stuck at 13, then you have to take your guy. Yeah. You have to absolutely decide, like, would I rather take a guard here that I feel confident is going to be a great guard? Do I want to take a safety here that I think is going to be a great safety? And if I'm being honest, with what I've seen from this organization for the last 20 years, I think given the choice between taking a dominant guard or a dominant safety, I'm taking a dominant guard.
So, all right, let me ask you this, and we'll close here. Who's the number one guy that you would want at 13?
I would like one of the corners. I don't think Will Johnson is going to fall to us. I don't know that Jahdae Barron.
Would you trade up to go get him?
No, I would not trade up. That's the one thing that I would not do with a team that has a ton of holes and is not showing any real urgency to try to win now. The last thing that I would do is trade up.
So you are saying then that Will Johnson is your guy?
Honestly, no. I mean, like my guy would be
so
Will Campbell.
Jahdae Barron is your guy.
No, I would say Will Campbell would be my
Will
guy
Campbell.
if he's
Will
there,
Campbell's
but I
your
don't
guy.
think he's going to be there.
Okay.
If I was putting a board together, of guys that I think that have a good shot at being there at 13, of those guys that we've been talking about, it would probably go in this order. It would probably go Will Campbell, Will Johnson, Jahdae Barron, Jihad Campbell, and then I'm kind of torn between Malachi Starks or James Pierce as far as like an edge rusher because it's just like, again, I know it's people, I know one person specifically that's going to call me Chris Greer for prioritizing the premier positions, but I would say
possibly imagine who you're talking to.
Oh, and then also Tyler Booker. Like I would put all those guys kind of in that same in that same bucket. I think the cool thing about being at 13 this year versus where we were at last year, which was 18, was that last year we were kind of right on the cusp of guys that had like first round grades. Like these guys are surefire first round picks. And it was like you had like your guys, and then right leading up to your pick, it was like they just kept getting picked off. And then all of a sudden you got to your pick and it was like nobody's there that you really wanted. And it felt like it was like a trade back scenario. I feel very confident that when the Dolphins are on the clock at 13, unless they make some sort of trade prior to the draft, there's going to be there's going to be multiple options there that would be great picks. And so I think it's very difficult for them to screw it up from just a, day of the draft.
Well, hold on. Remember who you're talking about here.
Hey, this is coming from the guy who, famously said they didn't screw it up when they drafted Tua Tagovailoa, and here we are now.
Fair, touche, if you will. That's going to wrap us up for this episode of the Same Old Dolphins Show. Make sure that you remember that you need to go to Apple Podcasts, leave a 5-star rating on the Dolphins Talk podcast, leave a positive comment, screenshot it, email it to dolphinstalk1977@gmail.com to be entered into a drawing to win an official Miami Dolphins draft cap. And then make sure you go over to dolphinstalk.com multiple times a day for all the latest news and information regarding your Miami Dolphins. Head to patreon.com/Dolphins Talk to become a member of Dolphins Talk Extra. We're going over to Dolphins Talk Extra as soon as we get off the air here to go record a bonus segment exclusively for Dolphins Talk Extra subscribers. So we're looking forward to that. So you don't want to miss those episodes. You don't want to miss access. All kinds of good stuff happening on the Discord over there at Dolphins Talk Extra. So join us over there if you haven't. And again, a reminder, take a moment. If you've made it this far in the video, smash that like button right below. We appreciate it. If you're watching live, do us a favor if you would. As soon as this video ends, quickly refresh the page and smash that like button one more time because that helps us a lot with the algorithm. It really does. It also really helps us a lot if you leave just a 5-star rating and a positive review over there on Apple Podcasts. So thank you, as always, for watching. We will be back next week talking a little second round and third round for the Miami Dolphins. But until then, take care of yourselves and each other. And as always, go Dolphins!
I say we can't screw it up, but if one thing's for sure, we're going to screw it up.